How could a single text from my daughter, telling me not to expect her to care for me, lead to her showing up at my house in tears before sunrise? When I calmly changed my estate papers, she thought she'd cut me out, but it was her own certainty that started slipping away. What did I do that made her question everything she thought she'd inherited? The text arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, the harsh glow of my phone screen cutting through the darkness of my living room like a blade. Don't expect me to care for you when you're old, Dad. I've got my own family now. No greeting, no context, just Courtney Brewster McKay delivering her verdict with the casual cruelty that had become her trademark. I stared at those words for a long moment, sitting in the same leather recliner where I'd held her as a colicky infant 36 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same chair where I'd read her bedtime stories, helped with homework, and later listened to her teenage heartbreaks. Now it was where I learned I'd become disposable. Earlier that evening, I'd spent 3 hours babysitting my grandson Mason while Courtney attended some networking event. The 3-year-old had scraped his knee on my back porch, and I'd cleaned the wound, applied a bandage decorated with cartoon dinosaurs, and distracted him with stories until the tears stopped. When Courtney picked him up, she barely glanced at the bandage, muttered a distracted thanks, and spent the entire handoff scrolling through her phone. "Mommy's busy, Grandpa Len," Mason had said with the matter-of-fact acceptance that broke my heart. Even at 3, he understood where he ranked in his mother's priorities. The pattern had been building for months. Last week at Romano's family restaurant, our monthly dinner tradition that I'd maintained faithfully since my wife Margaret passed away 8 years ago, Courtney had made a joke that still stung. Tyler, her husband, had been complaining about his aging father's growing medical bills when Courtney chimed in with a laugh that carried too much truth. "God, I hope our parents figure out their own end-of-life stuff," she'd said, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision. "I mean, we've got Mason's college fund to worry about, the mortgage, Tyler's practice. The last thing we need is elderly parents becoming a financial burden." Tyler had chuckled nervously, glancing at me. "Court, your dad's sitting right here." "Oh, Dad knows I'm kidding," she'd said without looking up. "Besides, he's got everything figured out, don't you, Dad? You're the engineer. You plan for everything." The table had erupted in polite laughter, but I'd seen the calculation in her eyes. I wasn't her father in that moment. I was a future expense she was already resenting. I'd tried to share a story from my early days at Hendrix Manufacturing, back when I was designing hydraulic systems that are still running in factories across the Midwest. But Courtney had interrupted before I'd finished the setup, pivoting the conversation to her latest promotion at the marketing firm. Tyler had nodded along dutifully while Mason colored his kid's menu, the only one at the table who seemed genuinely content. The next morning, my neighbor Dolores Harrington had knocked on my door with a container of her famous blueberry muffins and that concerned look she'd been wearing more often lately. "You seemed quiet at church yesterday, Len," she'd said, settling into the kitchen chair that Margaret used to occupy. "Everything all right with Courtney and the family?" I'd deflected with humor, the way I always did. "Just the usual generational differences, Dee. She thinks I'm becoming a dinosaur, and I think she's forgotten where she came from." Dolores had studied my face with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd raised 4 children and buried 1 husband. That girl doesn't know how good she's had it. Not everyone gets a father who'd move heaven and earth for them. She was right, of course. After Margaret passed away, I'd restructured my entire life around Courtney's needs. I'd helped with her college tuition when her scholarships fell short, co-signed her first apartment lease, and provided the down payment for the house where she now lived with Tyler and Mason. I'd been the reliable babysitter, the emergency contact, the safety net that allowed her to build the life she wanted. But safety nets, I was learning, become invisible when they're always there. Now, staring at her text in the blue glow of midnight, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too immediate. This was something colder, more methodical, the same careful precision I'd used to design systems that could withstand decades of pressure and stress. I set the phone aside and walked to my home office, a converted bedroom where I kept my important papers organized in the same meticulous filing system I'd used throughout my engineering career. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one with the lock that I'd installed myself, and pulled out a thick manila envelope labeled Estate Planning L. Brewster. Inside were documents I'd been meaning to update for years: my will, life insurance policies, investment account information, and the deed to the house that Courtney had always assumed would be hers someday. I'd seen her appraising glances when she visited, the way she'd comment on the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself or the kitchen I'd renovated after Margaret's diagnosis. "This place will be perfect for Mason when he's older," she'd said just last month, running her hand along the granite countertop. "All this space and the backyard is amazing. You won't need all this room forever, right, Dad?" At the time, I'd thought she was planning for a distant future. Now I understood she was conducting an inventory. I spread the papers across my desk, noting dates that went back nearly a decade. Margaret and I had set up the original will when Courtney was in college, back when leaving everything to our only child seemed like the most natural thing in the world. But Margaret was gone, and the daughter we'd raised with such hope and sacrifice had just told me not to expect her care when I needed it most. The envelope also contained something else, a business card for Aaron Gold, attorney at law. Aaron was a local lawyer I'd met through the Rotary Club, a sharp young man who specialized in estate planning and elder law. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Aaron had been Courtney's study partner in college, and they'd maintained a casual friendship through social media and the occasional coffee when he was in her part of town. I turned the business card over in my fingers, feeling its weight. Tomorrow, I decided, I would make some calls. If Courtney wanted to treat me like a burden she couldn't wait to shed, then perhaps it was time to ensure she never had to carry that weight at all. I slipped the papers back into the envelope and locked the drawer, but not before circling a date on my wall calendar, Thursday, 2 days away. Beneath it, I wrote a single word in my careful engineer's handwriting: freedom. The next morning brought memories I'd been trying to avoid, triggered by a photo Mason had drawn during his last visit. It was still magneted to my refrigerator, a stick-figure family with Grandpa Len, written in purple crayon beneath a tall figure holding the hand of a smaller one labeled Mason. Courtney and Tyler were notably absent from the artwork. Sitting at my kitchen table with coffee growing cold, I let myself remember the years when Courtney's absence would have been unthinkable. The memories came in waves, each one highlighting how far we'd drifted from the father-daughter team we'd once been. Margaret's final weeks had been spent in the oncology ward at St. Catherine's Hospital, a sterile maze of beeping machines and whispered conversations. Courtney was 28 then, working at her first marketing job in the city, building the career that would eventually consume her. I'd spent those long nights in the hospital waiting room, holding Margaret's hand through treatments, managing her medications, and trying to shield our daughter from the worst of it. "Don't let this derail her life, Len," Margaret had whispered during one of her clearer moments. "She's finally finding her way. Promise me you won't let her sacrifice her future to take care of us." I'd promised, and I'd kept that promise even after Margaret was gone. When Courtney needed to work late, I adjusted my schedule. When she wanted to travel with Tyler during their engagement, I encouraged her to go. When she struggled with the emotional weight of losing her mother, I became both parents, trying to fill a void that couldn't be filled. The pattern had started innocently enough. Courtney would call when she needed something: help moving furniture, advice on a work problem, someone to watch Mason when their regular babysitter fell through. I was always available, always willing. It felt good to be needed, to have purpose in a house that had grown too quiet after Margaret was gone. But somewhere along the way, "Can you help me?" had become, "I need you to handle this." Requests had become expectations, and expectations had hardened into entitlement. The shift had been gradual, like the way a river changes course, imperceptible day by day, but undeniable over time. Courtney's thank yous became less frequent, then disappeared altogether. Her visits grew shorter and more purpose-driven. She'd arrive with a list of things she needed: help with Mason, assistance with some household project Tyler couldn't handle, or advice on financial matters that she'd implement without acknowledging the source. Last spring, when I'd suggested we take a family vacation to celebrate Mason's 3rd birthday, Courtney had looked at me as if I'd proposed something absurd. "Dad, we can't afford to take time off for a vacation right now. Tyler's practice is growing, and I'm up for a promotion. Maybe when things settle down." But things never settled down for Courtney. There was always another promotion to chase, another networking event to attend, another milestone in her carefully orchestrated life that took precedence over family time. Meanwhile, I'd watched Tyler evolve from the earnest young man who'd asked my permission to marry my daughter into someone who treated me with polite indifference. He was never unkind, but there was a distance there, a sense that I was part of Courtney's past rather than their shared future. The breaking point had come 2 months ago at Riverside Park, where I'd taken Mason to feed the ducks, while Courtney and Tyler met with their financial advisor. I'd been pushing Mason on the swings when I overheard a conversation from the bench behind me. "The thing about aging parents," a woman was saying to her friend, "is that they become a problem you have to solve eventually. My sister's dealing with it now. Her dad needs more help, but he won't move to assisted living. It's becoming a real burden." "That's why we're putting everything in order now," her friend replied. "Power of attorney, healthcare directives, all of it. Better to have the difficult conversations while everyone's still healthy." I'd turned around, curious about these strangers discussing such personal matters in public, and felt a sudden chill grip me. The women weren't strangers at all. They were Courtney and Tyler's neighbor, Patricia Volkoff, and my own daughter. "Dad's stubborn," Courtney had been saying. "He thinks he can handle everything himself, but that house is too big for one person. And the maintenance, the yard work, it's only going to get worse as he gets older." "Have you talked to him about it?" Patricia had asked. "Tyler thinks we should wait until there's a crisis, but I think that's just postponing the inevitable. Better to start managing expectations now." Managing expectations. As if I were a project to be handled rather than a person to be loved. I'd continued pushing Mason's swing, my hands moving automatically while my mind reeled. They were discussing my future as if it were a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed. I was 62, in good health, and fully capable of making my own decisions. But in their minds, I'd already become a dependent. That evening, after returning Mason to his parents, I'd sat in my home office and really looked at my life for the first time in years. The house that I'd maintained meticulously, the investments I'd managed carefully, the insurance policies I'd kept current, all of it had been done with the assumption that Courtney would inherit a legacy worthy of the sacrifices Margaret and I had made. But what if she didn't deserve it? What if the daughter we'd raised to be independent and successful had become something else entirely? Someone who saw family as an obligation rather than a blessing? I'd pulled out my address book and found Aaron Gold's number. We'd served together on the Rotary Club's scholarship committee, and I'd been impressed by his knowledge of estate law and his reputation for discretion. I'd almost called him that night, but something had held me back. Maybe it was hope that Courtney would remember who we used to be to each other. Maybe it was fear that once I started down this path, there would be no going back. Now, staring at her text message in the harsh light of morning, I realized that Courtney had already chosen our path. She'd drawn her line in the sand with brutal clarity. She had her own family now, and I wasn't part of it. I picked up the phone and dialed Aaron's number. "Aaron, it's Len Brewster from Rotary. I hope I'm not calling too early, but I need to schedule an appointment. It's about my estate planning, and I'd prefer to handle this sooner rather than later." Aaron's voice was warm and professional. "Of course, Len. How about Thursday afternoon? I have a slot at 2 o'clock. Thursday, the date I'd circled on my calendar. "That's perfect. And Aaron? I'd appreciate if we could keep this confidential for now. Family dynamics, you understand?" "Absolutely. Attorney-client privilege begins the moment you walk through my door." After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of control. For too long, I'd been reacting to Courtney's choices, accommodating her schedule, adjusting my life to fit her convenience. But I was Leonard Brewster, a man who'd designed systems that powered industries, who'd raised a daughter as a widower, who'd built a life of substance and meaning. If Courtney wanted to treat me like a problem to be managed, then perhaps it was time to show her what real problem-solving looked like. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected test of my resolve. I was reviewing investment statements in my office when the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I could see Courtney's silver SUV in my driveway, and my heart did that involuntary skip it always did when she visited unexpectedly. For a moment, I wondered if she'd come to apologize for her text, to bridge the gap that had been widening between us. I should have known better. "Dad, perfect timing," she said as I opened the door, breezing past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. She was dressed in her work clothes, a sharp blazer and heels that clicked against my hardwood floors like a countdown timer. "I've been thinking about what we discussed at dinner last week." I didn't remember discussing anything meaningful at dinner last week, but I let her continue. "The thing is, Tyler and I have been talking to a financial planner, and he suggested we start consolidating family assets to make things easier down the road." She perched on the edge of my sofa, pulling out her phone to reference some notes. "Like your car, for instance. You barely drive it anymore, and the insurance and maintenance costs are just going to keep going up. What if we transferred the title to Tyler? He could handle all the paperwork, and you'd still have full access to it whenever you need it." I stared at her, processing the audacity of what she was suggesting. My car was a 2-year-old Honda Accord that I'd purchased after careful research and comparison shopping. I drove it to the grocery store, to church, to my monthly Rotary meetings, and to visit Mason. The idea that I barely drove it was absurd. "You want me to sign over my car to Tyler," I said slowly, making sure I understood. "Not sign it over, exactly. More like streamline the ownership. This way, if something happens to you, we won't have to deal with probate and all that complicated legal stuff. It's really about making things easier for everyone. Everyone except me, apparently. And what happens if Tyler and I disagree about when I need the car?" Courtney's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Dad, that's not going to be an issue. Tyler's very reasonable, and it's not like you're driving cross-country or anything. This is just about being practical." Practical. The word she'd been using more and more lately to justify treating me like an incompetent child. I was practical when I'd co-signed her first apartment lease. I was practical when I'd helped with her wedding expenses. But now that the help was supposed to flow in the other direction, practical meant surrendering my independence piece by piece. "I'll think about it," I said, which we both knew meant no. Courtney's expression shifted, and for a moment I saw something calculating behind her eyes. "Dad, you know I love you, right? But sometimes I worry that you're not thinking clearly about the future. You're 62, and things can change quickly at your age. Wouldn't it be better to make these decisions while you're still capable?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Still capable, as if my mental faculties were already in question, as if her request was somehow doing me a favor. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." She left shortly after, but not before kissing my cheek with the kind of mechanical affection that felt more like a performance than genuine emotion. I watched her SUV disappear down the street and realized that our relationship had crossed a line I hadn't even seen coming. She wasn't just taking me for granted anymore. She was actively working to diminish my autonomy. That afternoon, I drove my car, which I apparently barely used, to First National Bank, where I'd maintained accounts for over 20 years. Janet Kowalski, the branch manager, greeted me with the warmth reserved for longtime customers. "Mr. Brewster, how nice to see you. How can we help you today?" "I'm reviewing my financial arrangements," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I want to understand my options for trusts and estate planning. Specifically, I'm interested in how to structure inheritance to protect assets from premature expectations." Janet's eyebrows rose slightly, but her professional demeanor never wavered. "Are you concerned about creditor protection, or is this more about ensuring assets are distributed according to your wishes?" "The latter. I want to make sure that my legacy goes to someone who will appreciate it, rather than someone who sees it as an entitlement." We spent an hour discussing various trust structures, beneficiary designations, and the legal mechanisms available to ensure my wishes would be honored. By the time I left, I had a clear understanding of my options and a growing sense of anticipation for my appointment with Aaron Gold. Thursday arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of October weather that makes everything feel subdued and contemplative. Aaron's law office was located in a converted Victorian house downtown, the kind of building that projected both history and stability. I arrived 15 minutes early and spent the time reviewing the notes I'd made during my conversation with Janet. Aaron greeted me in the reception area, a man in his late 30s with an easy smile and the kind of confident handshake that suggested competence without arrogance. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that he'd had coffee with Courtney just 3 weeks earlier, a casual meet-up between old college friends where she'd mentioned her concerns about my increasing stubbornness and her worry that I wasn't planning appropriately for the future. "Len, good to see you," he said, leading me back to his office. "What can I do for you today?" His office was exactly what I'd expected. Law books, diplomas, family photos, and the kind of organized clutter that suggested a busy but competent practice. His paralegal, Janice Liu, brought us coffee and settled at a side table with a legal pad, ready to take notes. "I need to update my estate planning," I said without preamble. "My current will is outdated, and my circumstances have changed significantly." Aaron pulled out a fresh legal pad and uncapped his pen. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" I spent the next hour explaining my situation with careful precision, the same methodical approach I'd used to design hydraulic systems. I told him about Courtney's increasing distance, her assumptions about my assets, and her recent suggestion that I begin transferring ownership of my property to make things easier for everyone. Aaron listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Janice took notes with the focused attention of someone who'd heard similar stories before. Neither of them seemed surprised by my account, which was somehow both comforting and depressing. "What are your goals for the new estate plan?" Aaron asked when I'd finished. "I want to ensure that my legacy goes to someone who will value it appropriately," I said. "I have a 3-year-old grandson who means the world to me. I'd like to establish a trust that provides for his education and future, but I don't want his parents to have access to those funds." Aaron's pen paused over his legal pad. "That's certainly doable. We can set up a trust with specific age restrictions and an independent trustee. What about your daughter? Are you planning to include her as a beneficiary at all?" I considered the question for a long moment. "I'll leave her something," I said finally, "but not what she's expecting, and not in a way that allows her to continue taking my generosity for granted." As we discussed the details, I found myself sharing more than I'd intended. I told Aaron about Margaret's passing, about the years I'd spent supporting Courtney's dreams, about the gradual shift from gratitude to entitlement. I explained how her text message had crystallized something I'd been feeling for months, that I'd raised a daughter who saw me as a resource to be managed rather than a father to be loved. Aaron took notes throughout, occasionally glancing at Janice to ensure she was capturing the important details. What I didn't see was the slight frown that crossed his face when I mentioned Courtney's name, or the way he made a small note in the margin of his legal pad. "This type of trust structure will take about a week to draft properly," he said as our meeting wound down. "I'll need to research the specific language for the age restrictions and educational provisions. Can you come back next Thursday to review the documents?" "That's perfect," I said, standing to shake his hand. "And Aaron, I'd appreciate your discretion on this matter. I'd prefer that the details remain confidential until everything is finalized." "Of course," he said. "Attorney-client privilege is sacred in situations like this." I left his office feeling lighter than I had in months, carrying a manila folder containing preliminary trust documents and a timeline for finalizing my new estate plan. For the first time since receiving Courtney's text, I felt like I was taking control of my own narrative rather than simply reacting to hers. What I didn't know was that Aaron would spend the rest of the afternoon troubled by our conversation. Courtney had always spoken fondly of her father during their college years, and even in their recent coffee meeting, her concerns had seemed to come from a place of genuine worry rather than greed. The man he'd just met didn't match the picture she'd painted of an aging father who needed gentle guidance. That evening, Aaron found himself scrolling through his phone, looking at Courtney's contact information. He didn't call her, attorney-client privilege prevented that, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there were two very different versions of the same story, and he'd only heard one side. Meanwhile, I spent the evening organizing my financial documents with the same meticulous care I'd once used to organize technical specifications. I made copies of everything, stored originals in my fireproof safe, and created a detailed inventory of my assets. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something instead of just maintaining it. I was designing the perfect system, one that would protect what mattered most while teaching a valuable lesson about consequences and assumptions. It was going to be a masterpiece of engineering, and Courtney wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. The call came on Friday afternoon while I was reorganizing my tool shed, a mindless task that helped me think through the implications of what I was about to do. Courtney's name appeared on my phone screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. "Dad, I just had the strangest conversation," she said without preamble, her voice carrying that edge it got when she was trying to control something that was slipping away from her. "I ran into Aaron Gold at the coffee shop downtown. You remember Aaron, right? We went to college together." My hand tightened on the phone. "Aaron's a good man. We've worked together on some Rotary projects." "Right. Well, he mentioned that you'd been in to see him about estate planning. Dad, why didn't you tell me you were updating your will?" The question hung between us like a challenge. I could hear Tyler's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. Whatever he was saying, it was making Courtney more agitated. "I didn't realize I needed your permission to manage my own affairs," I said mildly. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. It's just, we should probably discuss these things as a family. Make sure everyone's on the same page." Everyone meaning her. "What exactly did Aaron tell you?" "Nothing specific. He just mentioned that you'd been in for a consultation. But Dad, some of the things he said, are you really thinking about leaving everything to charity?" I almost smiled. Aaron had been more discreet than I'd given him credit for, but apparently not discreet enough to avoid mentioning our meeting entirely. The charity comment was interesting. Either Aaron had deliberately misled her, or Courtney was fishing for information. "I'm exploring all my options," I said. "At my age, it's important to have everything in order." "But Dad, that's crazy. You've never even been religious. Why would you leave your estate to some church instead of family?" There it was. The assumption that had been driving her behavior all along, that my assets were essentially hers already, just temporarily housed in my name. The idea that I might have other plans was clearly unthinkable to her. "Who said anything about a church?" I asked. What other charities would you—" "Dad, you're not making sense. Can Tyler and I come over this weekend? I think we need to talk about this face to face." "I'm afraid I'll be busy this weekend," I said, which was true. I had plans that didn't involve being lectured by my daughter about my own money. "But Courtney, I want you to know that I've given a lot of thought to your text message the other night, about not expecting you to care for me." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Dad, I was upset when I sent that. I didn't mean—" "Oh, but I think you did mean it," I interrupted gently. "And I think you were right. You do have your own family to worry about. I wouldn't want to be a burden." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and allowed myself a moment of dark satisfaction. Courtney was worried now, and worry would make her sloppy. She'd start making assumptions, drawing conclusions based on incomplete information. It was exactly what I needed. Saturday morning, I drove to St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, a beautiful stone building where Margaret and I had been married 38 years ago. I hadn't attended services there since her funeral, but Father McKenna remembered me and welcomed me warmly. "Len Brewster, what a pleasant surprise. How are you holding up?" "I'm well, Father. Actually, I was hoping to talk with you about something. I've been thinking about my legacy lately, about what really matters in life." We spent an hour walking through the church gardens, discussing faith, family, and the nature of true generosity. Father McKenna was a thoughtful man who didn't push religion on me, but he did offer insights about finding meaning in life's later chapters. What he didn't realize was that our conversation was partly performance. I was establishing a paper trail of sorts, creating evidence of a spiritual awakening that existed only in Courtney's imagination. "You're always welcome here, Len," he said as we parted. "Sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected sources." I thanked him and made a small donation to the church's food bank, paying by check so there would be a record. Then I drove to the florist and bought a modest arrangement for Margaret's grave, stopping by the cemetery to spend some quiet time with my memories. By Sunday evening, Courtney had called twice more, each conversation more strained than the last. She was clearly frustrated by my evasive answers and what she perceived as my sudden religious awakening. The idea that her practical, engineering-minded father might leave his estate to a church seemed to genuinely disturb her, which told me everything I needed to know about her priorities. Monday brought my return visit to Aaron's office, where the final trust documents were waiting for review. Janice had prepared everything with meticulous attention to detail, and I read through each page carefully, asking questions about specific clauses and legal language. The trust was a thing of beauty in its simplicity and precision. Mason would be the sole beneficiary, receiving full control of the assets when he turned 21. Until then, the funds would be managed by an independent trustee, Aaron's firm, with specific provisions for education, healthcare, and basic living expenses. Courtney and Tyler would have no access to the money, no ability to influence how it was spent, and no legal standing to challenge the arrangement. "This is exactly what I wanted," I told Aaron as I reviewed the final pages. "Mason will have every opportunity to build whatever life he chooses, without his parents' financial pressures or expectations influencing his decisions." Aaron nodded, but I could see something troubled in his expression. "Len, I have to ask, have you considered the impact this might have on your relationship with your daughter?" "I have," I said. "And I've decided that a relationship built on financial expectations isn't really a relationship at all." The signing ceremony was conducted in Aaron's conference room, with Janice serving as one witness and a notary public named Patricia Vance serving as the other. Each page was initialed, each signature witnessed and notarized. The original documents would be filed with the county clerk's office, with copies stored in Aaron's secure files and a third set going home with me. As I signed the final page, I thought about Mason and the future I was giving him. He would grow up knowing that someone had believed in his potential enough to invest in it completely. He would have the freedom to choose his own path without the burden of family debt or the pressure of parental expectations. It was the greatest gift I could imagine giving him. "There is one more thing," I said as we finished the paperwork. "I'd like to draft a letter to be given to Mason when he comes of age, something to explain why I made these choices and what I hope he'll do with the opportunities I'm providing." Aaron provided me with letterhead and privacy to write, and I spent an hour crafting a message to the grandson I might not live to see become a man. I told him about his grandmother Margaret, about the values we'd tried to instill in his mother, and about the importance of using privilege responsibly. I sealed the letter in an envelope marked "For Mason McKay" to be opened on his 21st birthday and handed it to Aaron for safekeeping. Walking out of Aaron's office that afternoon, I felt a profound sense of completion. The system I'd designed was now in place, legally binding and irreversible. Courtney's assumptions about her inheritance had been quietly, methodically dismantled, and she wouldn't know it until it was far too late to change anything. That evening, I called Dolores and invited her for coffee the next morning. She arrived with homemade cinnamon rolls and that knowing look she got when she sensed gossip brewing. "You seem different lately, Len," she said, settling into Margaret's old chair. "Lighter, somehow. What's going on?" "I've been making some changes," I said carefully. "Getting my affairs in order, making sure everything's arranged the way it should be." "Does this have anything to do with Courtney? I saw her car in your driveway Friday afternoon and she looked upset when she left." I smiled and sipped my coffee. "Let's just say I'm taking her advice about not expecting her to take care of me." Dolores studied my face with the shrewd intelligence that had made her such a good friend over the years. "Len Brewster, what have you done?" Nothing irreversible, I said, which was technically true. The trust was irreversible, but my decision to create it had been entirely reversible right up until the moment I'd signed the papers. Like, I'm just making sure my legacy goes to someone who will appreciate it. And that someone isn't Courtney? That someone is 3 years old and won't have access to anything until he's old enough to handle it responsibly. Dolores's eyes widened as she understood the implications. You left everything to Mason. I left everything to Mason, I confirmed, in a trust that his parents can't touch, can't influence, and can't use for their own purposes. Oh my, she said, reaching for another cinnamon roll. Oh my, Len, you magnificent force of nature. We spent the rest of the morning discussing the details I was comfortable sharing, and Dolores's appreciation for the elegant justice of my solution was deeply satisfying. She understood better than anyone how Courtney had taken my generosity for granted, and she could appreciate the poetic precision of ensuring that my legacy would skip a generation to reach someone who might actually value it. As she prepared to leave, Dolores paused at my front door. When is she going to find out? Soon, I said. Very soon. That night, I organized all my copies of the trust documents in a folder marked Estate Planning Final and placed it in my desk drawer where Courtney would be sure to find it when the time came. Everything was in place now, every detail accounted for, every contingency planned. All that remained was waiting for the moment when Courtney's assumptions would collide with reality. And based on the increasingly frantic tone of her recent calls, that moment was approaching faster than she realized. The weekend passed with an unusual sense of peace settling over my house. I spent Saturday morning tending to my garden, pulling the last of the season's tomatoes, and preparing the beds for winter. The physical work felt good, purposeful in a way that reminded me why I'd loved engineering, the satisfaction of building something that would last. Dolores stopped by Sunday afternoon with a casserole and an expression of barely contained excitement. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, she said, settling into her usual spot at my kitchen table. Are you really going to let Courtney find out through Aaron? That seems almost gentle for what she's put you through. I considered her question while serving us both coffee. The beauty of this approach is that it's not about revenge, Dee. It's about natural consequences. Courtney made her position clear. She doesn't want to care for me, and she sees my assets as her future security. I'm simply ensuring that her assumptions don't match reality. But when she finds out that Mason gets everything and she gets nothing, she doesn't get nothing, I corrected. She gets exactly what she asked for. Freedom from the burden of caring for her aging father. No inheritance means no obligation. It's quite generous, really. Dolores laughed, the kind of delighted sound that came from watching a perfectly executed plan unfold. You know she's going to call you the moment she finds out. I'm counting on it. Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was reading the newspaper over breakfast when Tyler's pickup truck pulled into my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched him sit behind the wheel for several minutes, clearly gathering courage for a conversation he didn't want to have. When he finally knocked, I answered the door with genuine curiosity. Tyler and I had always maintained a cordial but distant relationship. He was polite to me because I was Courtney's father, not because we'd ever developed any real connection. Mr. Brewster, I hope I'm not interrupting, he said, looking uncomfortable in his business casual clothes. Could we talk for a few minutes? I invited him in and offered coffee, which he declined. He perched on the edge of my sofa like a man ready to flee at any moment. Courtney's been really worried about you, he began, then stopped and tried again. We both have. This thing about leaving your estate to charity, it just doesn't sound like you. What sounds like me, Tyler? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Well, I mean, you've always been so focused on family, on Courtney and Mason. It just seems strange that you'd cut them out completely. I leaned back in my chair, studying this young man who'd married my daughter and helped create my grandson. Tyler wasn't a bad person. He was just weak, content to let Courtney make the important decisions and go along with whatever served their immediate interests. Has it occurred to you that I might have good reasons for my choices? I asked. Of course, but Mr. Brewster, Courtney loves you. We both do. And Mason adores his grandfather. Whatever's upset you, I'm sure we can work it out. The sincerity in his voice almost made me feel guilty. Almost. But then I remembered the conversation I'd overheard at the park, the casual way they'd discussed managing my future like a business problem. Tyler, let me ask you something. When you and Courtney talk about my future, what do you envision? He shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, when you think about me getting older, needing more help, maybe becoming less independent, what's your plan? The silence stretched long enough to become awkward. Tyler's face flushed slightly, and I could see him struggling to find an answer that wouldn't reveal too much. "We just want what's best for everyone," he said finally. "And what's best for everyone involves me transferring my assets to you for easier management, correct? That's not... We never said..." He stopped, realizing that denial would be pointless. "Look, Mr. Brewster, we're not trying to take advantage of you. We're trying to plan responsibly for the future." "Whose future, Tyler? Mine or yours?" He left shortly after that, clearly frustrated by his inability to extract any useful information or commitments from me. I watched his truck disappear down the street and wondered how long it would take him to report back to Courtney that her father was being unreasonable. Tuesday brought a call from Aaron that I'd been expecting. "Len, I wanted to let you know that all your documents have been filed with the county. Everything's official and legally binding now." "Excellent. Any problems with the filing?" "None at all. The trust is airtight. I made sure of that. But Len, I have to tell you, I'm a little concerned about the fallout when your family finds out about this." I appreciated Aaron's concern, but I'd moved beyond worrying about Courtney's reaction. "Aaron, my daughter sent me a text message telling me not to expect her to care for me because she has her own family now. I'm simply honoring her wishes." "I understand, but do you have children, Aaron?" "2 daughters, ages 8 and 10. "Then you understand that the greatest gift we can give our children is the knowledge that love and generosity are earned through respect and reciprocity, not through family ties alone. I'm teaching my daughter a valuable lesson about consequences." After I hung up, I spent the afternoon writing letters, not the emotional, explanatory type, but practical communications to my bank, insurance company, and investment advisor, informing them of the trust arrangements and providing them with copies of the relevant documents. Everything needed to be properly coordinated so that when Courtney eventually tried to claim her inheritance, she would discover that it simply didn't exist. Wednesday evening brought the call I'd been waiting for. My phone rang at 11:23 p.m., and Courtney's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering, long enough to suggest I'd been awakened. "Dad, we need to talk," she said without preamble. Her voice had a strained quality that suggested she'd been crying or shouting or both. "It's rather late, Courtney. Can this wait until morning?" "No, it can't wait. Dad, I know what you did. Aaron told me about the trust, about leaving everything to Mason. How could you do this to me?" Interesting. Aaron had apparently decided that attorney-client privilege didn't extend to keeping secrets from old college friends. Or perhaps Courtney had been more persistent in her inquiries than I'd given her credit for. "I'm not sure what you're upset about," I said calmly. "I thought you'd be pleased that I'm taking care of Mason's future." "Don't play games with me, Dad. You know exactly what I'm upset about. You're cutting me out of your will completely, after everything I've done for you, after all the years I've spent taking care of you." "Taking care of me?" I interrupted. "Courtney, when exactly have you taken care of me?" The silence on the other end was telling. She couldn't answer because the premise was false, and we both knew it. "I'm your daughter," she said finally, as if that fact alone entitled her to my estate. "Yes, you are. And Mason is my grandson. I'm ensuring that he has every opportunity to build whatever life he chooses, without the burden of parents who see his inheritance as their retirement plan. That's not fair, and you know it. We would never... Wouldn't you? Tyler was just here Monday morning, trying to convince me to reconsider my unreasonable decision to leave my money to charity instead of family. Except I never said anything about charity, Courtney. That assumption came from somewhere else." Another silence, longer this time. "Dad, please, can we meet tomorrow and talk about this? I know we haven't always seen eye to eye lately, but we're family. This isn't how family treats each other." "You're absolutely right," I said. "It isn't. I'll see you tomorrow, Courtney." I hung up before she could respond, then turned off my phone and went to bed. For the first time in months, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, the sleep of a man whose conscience was clear and whose plans were complete. Thursday morning dawned gray and cold, with the kind of October wind that strips the last leaves from the trees and reminds you that winter is coming whether you're ready or not. I made coffee, read the newspaper, and waited. Courtney's SUV appeared in my driveway at 6:47 a.m., just as the sun was beginning to paint the eastern sky with pale gold. Through my kitchen window, I could see her sitting behind the wheel, talking animatedly on her phone, probably to Tyler, possibly to Aaron, certainly to someone she hoped could help her find a way out of the situation she'd discovered. When she finally got out of the car, I could see even from a distance that she looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her clothes looked like she'd slept in them, and her face had the pale, strained appearance of someone who'd spent the night confronting an unthinkable reality. I finished my coffee, straightened my tie, and prepared to open the door. The system I'd designed was about to be tested, and I had complete confidence in its engineering. The doorbell rang at exactly 6:52 a.m., followed immediately by frantic knocking. Through the peephole, I could see Courtney's face, pale and desperate, her eyes red-rimmed from what had clearly been a sleepless night. Behind her, Tyler stood on my front walkway, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else in the world. I opened the door slowly, deliberately, taking in the full picture of their distress before speaking. "Courtney, Tyler, you're up early." "Dad, we need to talk. Right now." Courtney pushed past me into the living room, her usual composed demeanor completely shattered. "What you've done, it's insane. You can't just cut your own daughter out of your will and leave everything to a 3-year-old. Tyler followed more hesitantly, offering me an apologetic shrug that suggested this confrontation hadn't been his idea. "Mr. Brewster, maybe we could all sit down and discuss this calmly." "I am calm, Tyler. Would you like some coffee?" "Coffee?" Courtney whirled around to face me, her voice rising to a pitch that would have been embarrassing under normal circumstances. "Dad, you've lost your mind. Completely lost your mind. Aaron told me everything, the trust, the age restrictions, all of it. You're giving a 3-year-old child control of hundreds of thousands of dollars while leaving his mother with nothing." I settled into my favorite chair, the same one where I'd received her text message just a week ago. The symmetry was satisfying. "I'm giving Mason control of those funds when he turns 21, not at 3. Until then, they'll be managed by professionals who have his best interests at heart." "His best interests? Dad, I'm his mother. I know what his best interests are better than some stranger in a law office." "Do you? Because from where I sit, it seems like Mason's best interests have been secondary to yours for quite some time." Courtney's face flushed red, and for a moment I thought she might actually scream. Instead, she pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be notes she'd made during the night. "Aaron explained the whole thing to me. The trust is irrevocable. You can't change it even if you wanted to. Mason gets everything when he's 21, and until then, Tyler and I have no access to any of it. No access to money that could pay for his education, his health care, his—" "The trust provides for all of those things," I interrupted. "Aaron was very thorough in establishing provisions for Mason's legitimate needs. What it doesn't provide for is his parents' convenience or financial planning." Tyler cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Brewster, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. We're not trying to take advantage of anyone. We just want to make sure Mason has every opportunity— Every opportunity to what, Tyler? To grow up knowing that his parents see his inheritance as their retirement fund? To learn that family love is conditional on financial benefit?" The front door opened without warning, and Dolores walked in carrying a plate of fresh muffins. She took in the scene, Courtney's tear-stained face, Tyler's uncomfortable posture, my calm demeanor, and her eyes lit up with understanding. "Oh my," she said, setting the muffins on my coffee table. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all, Dee. Courtney and Tyler were just learning about some changes I've made to my estate planning." Dolores settled into the chair next to mine with the satisfied air of someone settling in to watch a particularly good movie. "How wonderful. I do love it when families discuss important matters openly." Courtney stared at Dolores as if she'd materialized from thin air. "This is a private family conversation." "Of course it is, dear. Don't mind me." Dolores selected a muffin and began buttering it with deliberate slowness. "Dad, please," Courtney said, turning back to me with desperation creeping into her voice. "I know I haven't been the perfect daughter lately. I know I've been busy with work and Mason and everything else. But cutting me out completely, after everything we've been through together? Tell me, Courtney, what exactly have we been through together recently?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly struggling to find examples of our shared experiences that didn't involve her asking for something. "I helped you after Mom passed away," she said finally. "You were 28 when your mother was gone. You helped by letting me handle all the arrangements, all the legal paperwork, all the emotional burden while you focused on your career, which, by the way, I encouraged because I thought it was what you needed." "That's not— I was grieving too, Dad." "Of course you were. And I made sure your grief didn't interfere with your life plans. Just like I made sure your wedding costs didn't interfere with your honeymoon plans. Just like I made sure your mortgage down payment didn't interfere with your career plans. I've spent 8 years making sure nothing interfered with your plans, Courtney." Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Brewster, we've always been grateful for your help." "Have you? Because last week your wife sent me a text message telling me not to expect her to care for me because she has her own family now. That didn't sound particularly grateful." Courtney's face went white. "You're doing this because of one text message?" "Dad, I was upset. I'd had a bad day at work, and Mason was sick, and You just told me the truth, I said, and I want to thank you for that clarity. It helped me understand exactly where I stand in your life. I stood up and walked to my home office, returning with the folder I'd prepared. Inside were copies of all the trust documents, Mason's birth certificate, and a few other papers that would make the situation crystal clear. These are copies of the legal documents establishing Mason's trust, I said, handing the folder to Courtney. As you can see, everything is properly notarized, witnessed, and filed with the county clerk's office. Courtney's hands shook as she opened the folder and began reading. Tyler leaned over her shoulder, and I watched their faces change as they absorbed the full implications of what I'd done. This says Mason gets everything, Tyler said quietly. The house, the investments, the life insurance, everything. That's correct. And we get nothing until he's 21, Courtney added, her voice barely above a whisper. Actually, you get nothing even then. Mason gets everything when he's 21. You'll be in your 50s by then, with your own established careers and financial resources. You won't need an inheritance from me. Courtney looked up from the papers with an expression of complete bewilderment. Dad, this is crazy. You can't just give everything to a 3-year-old and leave his parents with nothing. What if something happens to you tomorrow? What if Mason needs something the trust doesn't cover? What if you have to take care of your own family with your own resources? I suggested. What if you have to plan for your future without counting on my money? What if you have to treat me well because you love me, not because you're expecting an inheritance? The silence that followed was profound. Even Dolores stopped chewing her muffin, sensing that we'd reached the crucial moment. There's one more thing, I said, pulling a single sheet of paper from the folder. This is a letter I've written to be given to Mason on his 21st birthday. It explains why I made these choices and what I hope he'll do with the opportunities I'm providing. I held the letter so Courtney could see the header. For my grandson Mason McKay, to be opened on his 21st birthday. In this letter, I tell Mason about his grandmother Margaret, about the values we tried to instill in his mother, and about the importance of using privilege responsibly. I also tell him about the text message you sent me, Courtney, and about the conversation I overheard at the park where you and Tyler discussed me as a future burden to be managed. Courtney's face went from white to green. You heard that? I heard enough. I heard my daughter discussing my future as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. I heard you and Tyler making plans for my life without including me in the conversation. Tyler found his voice. Mr. Brewster, that's not how we meant it. We were just trying to be responsible. Responsible for whom, Tyler? For me or for yourselves? The front door opened again, and this time it was Aaron Gold who entered, looking harried and apologetic. I'm sorry to barge in, Len, but Courtney called me at 6 this morning, demanding that I come over here and explain why you can't do what you've done. He paused, taking in the scene. I see you're all having the conversation already. Aaron, thank God, Courtney said, jumping up from the couch. Tell him this is all a mistake. Tell him he can still change his mind. Aaron looked uncomfortable. Courtney, I explained this to you on the phone. The trust is irrevocable. Your father signed all the documents, they've been properly witnessed and notarized, and they've been filed with the county. There's no legal mechanism for changing any of it. But there has to be something. Power of attorney, mental competency, something that proves he wasn't thinking clearly when he signed those papers. Aaron's expression hardened. Courtney, your father was completely competent when he created this trust. He understood every provision, asked intelligent questions, and made his decisions with full knowledge of the consequences. Suggesting otherwise would be both legally and ethically inappropriate. I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out one final document that I'd prepared for exactly this moment. Actually, there is one more thing, I said, returning to the living room with a single sheet of paper. This is a letter I wrote to you, Courtney, to be given to you today. I handed her the letter, and she opened it with trembling hands. As she read, her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, understanding. Read it aloud, I said. I think everyone should hear this. Courtney's voice was barely steady as she began reading. Dear Courtney, by the time you read this letter, you will have learned that I have left my entire estate in trust to your son Mason. You will probably be angry, confused, and hurt. You may even think I've lost my mind. I want you to understand that this decision was made with complete clarity and careful consideration. She paused, looking up at me with tears in her eyes, but I gestured for her to continue. You sent me a text message telling me not to expect you to care for me because you have your own family now. I want you to know that I heard you clearly, and I respect your position. You are absolutely right. You do have your own family to worry about, and I would never want to be a burden to you. Her voice broke slightly, but she continued reading. By leaving everything to Mason, I am ensuring that you never have to worry about taking care of me out of financial obligation. You are free to build whatever relationship you choose with me, knowing that money will never be a factor. If you choose to love me and spend time with me, it will be because you want to, not because you're protecting an inheritance. Tyler had gone completely silent, staring at the floor as if he could disappear into it. Mason will grow up knowing that someone believed in his potential enough to invest in it completely. He will have every opportunity to choose his own path, pursue his own dreams, and build his own life without the burden of family financial pressures. He will also grow up understanding that privilege comes with responsibility, and that the greatest gifts we can give are love, respect, and genuine care for others. Courtney's hands were shaking so badly now that she could barely hold the letter. I hope that someday you will understand that this decision was not made in anger or spite, but in love. Love for you, love for Mason, and love for the values your mother and I tried to instill in you. You are a capable, intelligent woman who has built a successful career and a beautiful family. You don't need my money to continue building the life you want. But Mason, at 3 years old, needs someone to believe in his future and invest in his potential. I am honored to be that someone. She reached the end of the letter and looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There's one final thing I want to say, I continued. You told me you have your own family to care for now, and you are absolutely right. Mason is part of that family. The trust I've created ensures that he will have every advantage, every opportunity, and every resource he needs to build whatever life he chooses. You should be celebrating, Courtney. Your son is going to be a very wealthy young man someday, and he'll have earned it through no effort of his own, just like you expected to. I walked to my front door and opened it, the morning air crisp and clean against my face. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a full day planned. Dolores and I are going to visit Mason at his preschool and take him to lunch. I want to spend time with my grandson while I can still enjoy his company without wondering what he'll inherit from me. Courtney stood up slowly, the legal documents clutched in one hand and my letter in the other. Dad, please. We can work this out. We can what, Courtney? You can pretend to care about me until I'm gone and then fight over my money? You can include me in your family plans as long as I'm useful? You can love me conditionally based on what I can provide for you? I stepped aside, gesturing toward the open door. You have exactly what you asked for. Freedom from the burden of caring for me, and a son who will never have to worry about money. I'd say that's a pretty good outcome for everyone involved. Aaron gathered his papers and headed for the door, pausing to shake my hand. Len, I want you to know that everything you've done is completely legal and binding. No one can challenge this trust or change its terms. Dolores stood up and brushed muffin crumbs from her lap. Well, that was certainly educational. Courtney, dear, you might want to consider that some gifts are more valuable than money. Your father has given you the gift of honesty, and that's worth more than any inheritance. Tyler finally found his voice as they reached the door. Mr. Brewster, what happens now? What happens to our relationship? I looked at him with genuine curiosity. What relationship, Tyler? You've been married to my daughter for 8 years, and we've never had a single meaningful conversation that wasn't about what I could do for you. But you're welcome to visit any time you'd like to try building an actual relationship instead of just managing a future inheritance. Courtney turned back one final time, her face streaked with tears. Dad, I love you. I know I haven't shown it well lately, but I do love you. I love you too, Courtney. That's why I'm giving you the chance to prove that your love isn't conditional on my money. I watched them walk to their car, Courtney clutching the documents that had just changed her entire future, Tyler supporting her with the awkward care of a man who wasn't sure how to handle a crisis he'd helped create. As their SUV disappeared down the street, I closed the door and turned to find Dolores grinning at me with undisguised admiration. Len Brewster, she said. That was absolutely magnificent. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the garden where I'd spent so many peaceful hours, the yard where Mason had learned to ride his tricycle, the home where Margaret and I had built a life together. You know what the best part is, Dee, I said, pouring myself a fresh cup of coffee. Mason's going to grow up knowing that someone loved him enough to invest in his future without expecting anything in return. That's a gift worth more than any amount of money. Dolores raised her coffee mug in a toast. To Mason, and to the grandfather who's going to teach him the difference between love and obligation. I clinked my mug against hers and smiled. For the first time in months, I felt completely at peace with the world and my place in it. The system I'd designed was working perfectly, and the future I'd created for Mason was secure. Outside, the October sun was burning off the morning clouds, promising a beautiful day ahead.